Hello and welcome again to FAIRtax Power Radio. I'm Bob Paxton.
And I'm Romolero.
And we are
the FAIRtax Guys.
Coming to you recorded and in person on our free podcasts.
Yes, free for nothing.
On Spreaker, or if you've got your FAIRtax Guys
free app,
you can do that.
For the iPhone or the Android.
So there's lots of ways to listen to us. None of it costs you a dime, and we hope you're doing it.
Yep. And tell everybody else about it. If we're going to get this FAIRtax passed, then people need to be educated about the fair tax and avoid the pitfalls that some of the few opponents that there are, they bring up. So you need to be educated. Let people know about this free podcast. We post a brand new one every Friday morning. It's 30 minutes long, so it doesn't take a lot of your time. And because it's a podcast, you can listen to it whenever your little heart desires.
Yes, they hear us in India and Japan, I understand.
That's right. Yeah.
And check that out.
That's why we're the world famous FAIRtax Guys.
Shout out to those folks over there. Hopefully they can get a fair tax as long as ours. But, all right. Well, I'll tell you what. Again, we do encourage you to talk to us. The FAIRtaxGuys@gmail.com. Like our Facebook page. We have our own FAIRtax Guys Facebook page. You will see why we're on the radio instead of television once you look at our pictures. But we do appreciate hearing from folks and getting the feedback and the commentary. And once again, we have another Facebook Live coming up pretty quick.
Yes, in which case you'll see why we are mostly on the radio. But yeah, that's going to be September 12th, so it's only a few days from the when this podcast posts at 8 o'clock in the evening Eastern Time, Facebook Live. And, we'll probably have a theme to talk about, but when the questions come in, we respond to the questions live so you can get your answers, right away. That's what makes it so much fun because
we got some really good questions last time. In fact, if you back up and listen to the previous episode here of FAIRtax Power Radio, we went into a little more detail on a couple of them, and yours can be next.
Yeah, that's right. So, we one or two of those questions were the basis of the last podcast. The whole half hour was based on going into detail to answer those folks' questions. So, thank you. But you can also email us if you're not on Facebook or you didn't get to see the Facebook Live. You can email us whenever you want, thefairtaxguys@gmail.com. So, send your questions in and we'll do our best to respond to it. And if there's something that, is really technical that Bob and I can't answer, we got experts that'll help us out. No problem.
Yeah, Randy is over there in the next page. Randy Fisher is over in the next room answering some of these comments. But you're talking about answering questions, okay?
Yeah.
What is a very common way of getting questions answered when you are part of the online community?
Well, you can go to a website and look for their frequently asked questions.
Your FAQ file.
Yeah.
And you had this brilliant idea, and I don't mean that despairingly. I mean that literally. You had a brilliant idea. There are some really good questions and answers at fairtax.org, which is the website of the AFFT, Americans for Fair Taxation, the national grassroots organization. If you've got questions about the fair tax, that is a really good place to go get them answered. And we're actually going to steal a couple of their questions and answers here for this episode of FAIRtax Power Radio. Some of the ones that folks would probably most likely ask about the fair tax.
Yeah. There's a lot of questions there. We don't obviously have time to go over all of them, but there's some really good ones that that are more frequently asked by people when we meet the public. So yeah.
So with appropriate credit being given to the FAIRtax.org FAQ file here, we're not going to get into quite as much detail as they do on some of these questions, but we do want to give you a sampling of what kind of questions can be answered there and the answers to some of the most common questions. And the first one at the very top of the pile here is, why don't you just exempt food and medicine from the tax? Wouldn't that be fair and simple?
Yeah, and the answer is no, it wouldn't. It would be horrendous because it would create another whole bureaucracy. Okay, so you exempt food and medicine.
Wait a minute. What is food?
Yeah, exactly. That's what
that
is considered
sounds like
food.
An easy question, but it's really not that easy to answer when you have to go looking through every item on every shelf of the grocery store and trying to determine if that's food. Or if somebody says, why don't you just untax basic necessities? Well, what is a basic necessity and what's not?
Right.
The milk and eggs, and that's pretty easy. How about chewing gum?
Yeah,
is that
chewing
food?
gum, chips. beer.
Yeah, well, that's a necessity to some folks and not so much to others. But that's the beauty of the fair tax. You get to decide what your necessities are because you're untaxed on your spending up to the poverty level. You can buy anything you want to with that money that you're getting a prebate to cover the tax on it. But that's it. It is not fair. And can you imagine the heyday that the lobbyists would have if we start carving out exemptions? Then pretty soon the fair tax would look like the income tax system we've got now.
That's right. Yeah, the lobbyists would love that idea because they get in there for every nitpicking little item. Remember, we found on Congress.gov a proposal to make tax deductible certain types of batteries for certain types of hearing aids. Well, if they can get that picayune with batteries, think of what they can do with all the food items. So no, making food in general tax deductible does not do it.
All right, let me quote a little bit from the FAIRtax org answer to this thing. It says, exempting items by category is neither fair nor simple. Respected economists have shown that the wealthy spend much more on unprepared food, clothing, housing, and medical care than do the poor. And so exempting these goods, as many state sales taxes do, actually would give the wealthy a disproportionate benefit.
Yeah.
And one of the things that people knock on consumption taxes / sales taxes, they're regressive, they hurt the poor. The fair tax is designed specifically not to hurt the poor.
Yeah, exactly, because of the prebate. And what all this is relating to is instead of giving a prebate, and we've heard this question a number of times, well, instead of giving a prebate, why don't you just exempt food, on the basic necessities? And like Bob says, well, what is food? What are basic necessities? It is much simpler to look at the size of a household, whether you got 1, 2, 3, 4, whatever the size of the household, and use the poverty levels published by the Health and Human Services and determine what is going to be the necessary income, the basic income for a family. Let's say, we usually use the family of 4, mom and dad and 2 kids. And I believe that the poverty level is like 32.6 or something like that. You can look it up. And so very simply, they're going to take 23% of that. That's going to be $7,000 and something divided up into 12 easy payments, 1 month apiece, and send that to you. And then that is so simple. And what is not simple is trying to determine what food items are going to be tax exempt and which ones are not.
It's just a whole lot easier to pay the tax on everything you buy. You get refunded back the tax that you paid that you don't owe, i.e. the tax that was collected on your spending up to the poverty level. You decide what your basic necessities are, not some government bureaucrat somewhere. It's just so much simpler and so much fairer just to give everybody a prebate, a refund, if you will, on the taxes that are collected at the cash register that are not owed. And that's just a pure and simple, easy way to do it. Let me get one more thing here out of the FAQ answer. There's
one other aspect of this, too.
Okay.
I've also heard, well, what if we just exempt poor families? Well, who's poor? And how are we going to establish, what a poor family is?
There'll be a whole industry of people disguising themselves as poor families.
Yeah.
Whatever the criteria is, there'll be people that really don't deserve the break who will try to get it.
And that happens now. So, no, we don't want to get into that either.
But I was getting into this, let me quote this again from the FAQ answer. It says, finally, exempting one product or service but not another opens the door to the army of lobbyists and special interest groups that plague and distort our taxation system today. Those who have money will send lobbyists to Washington to obtain special tax breaks in their own self-interest. This process causes unfair and inefficient distortions in our economy and must be stopped.
Yeah, that pretty well sums it up. An army of lobbyists.
I still like your description of what this tax reform is going to be. The Tax Lobbyist Full Employment Act of 2017.
Oh yeah, sure. If they flatten out the tax, because I've got another report over here that says tax reform for this year is not looking too good. Well, we could see that because we have a Congress that seems to be rather inept, but still. any form of tax reform that just flattens out the tax code, maybe reduces the number of brackets, reduces the rates, tweaks it here and there. Lobbyists love the idea of a flatter tax because they get to start all over again. Same thing with this basic necessities. If you start dictating or trying to figure out what is food and what's not food, the lobbyists love that idea too because they would get involved in that. Just think of them. You would double the number of lobbyists in Washington if you did something like that.
All right, let's move along here to the next one. How is the Social Security system affected? Now, there is a question that is of great importance to a lot of folks, you and me included.
That's right. And we did an episode on Social Security not too long ago. Well, right now, how is Social Security paid for?
It's payroll tax. People who work for wages and get a paycheck are the ones that are supporting Social Security, period.
That's right. And very wealthy people who have investments, maybe they have a salary and some of it's taken out, but they also make money through investments. Those investments don't contribute to Social Security and Medicare. Not at all. The interest in dividends on those things, no, there's nothing that goes to Social Security. So right now, Social Security is supported by people who get a paycheck, and that's it.
I like the idea of nailing the folks in the underground economy.
Yeah.
Foreign tourists that come as well. The fair tax will hit those folks that are currently, missing out on the current income tax system.
That's right. And Bob,
we missing out on supporting Social Security and Medicare.
We recently had a report here in Florida because we got these great theme parks, Disney World and Universal and SeaWorld and so forth and all those. Our governor announced that as of mid-August, we had 60.7 million visitors to this state. And because we have a sales tax and not an income tax, all those folks, those visitors, help us pay our state expenses because they collect sales tax on the rooms that they when they reserve a motel room, when they buy food, when they go to restaurants, when they buy tickets to the theme parks and so forth, and when they rent cars. So all those wonderful visitors are helping Florida pay its bills, and that's what we need to do nationwide. So when the fair tax goes into effect nationwide, like Bob said, all the people in the underground economy who are not reporting their income, so what? I don't care if they report their income or not, but they're going to have to eat.
Yep, they buy things.
And they buy stuff, yeah. So, that will catch up with them. So it's going to mean that everybody in the country has skin in the game. And again, for Social Security, it's going to put Social Security, the funding of Social Security, on a huge, much greater, broader tax basis because everybody who makes a purchase of a new product or service, some of the fair tax has to go to Social Security and Medicare. It's about 35.15, something like. It's around 35% of the proceeds of the fair tax must go to Social Security and Medicare. And think of the millions of purchases that are made every single day in this country and the tax that's collected on those purchases. And part of that tax will go to support Social Security and Medicare. A much more stable foundation for supporting those two programs than what we have now.
Amen. Moving along. Is there any provision in the fair tax bill to prevent both an income tax and a sales tax?
In the bill, well...
Short answer is no.
The short answer is no. However, a lot of the bill has language that rescinds the current tax code. So, and it also tells the IRS, you've got 3 years to finish up what you're currently working on, and then you're gone. So when the fair tax passes both the House and the Senate and is signed by the president, then the current tax code goes away. Congress has no authority to collect income tax.
Now, they could put it back if they wanted to. The only thing that will really prevent an income tax from ever being reimposed in the future would be repeal of the 16th Amendment, because the Supreme Court said prior to the 16th Amendment becoming law in 1913 that there were court cases, and the Supreme Court did rule on it when states tried to do it, or the federal government tried to do it as well. An income tax without the 16th Amendment is unconstitutional.
That's right. So that is sister legislation. The repeal of the 16th Amendment must go along with the fair tax. Now, if for some reason the 16th Amendment, the repeal of the 16th Amendment is not ratified by 3/4 of the states, then the fair tax goes away and the income tax goes back in place.
Yeah, we want to make sure, those who designed the fair tax wanted to make sure that the federal government would never be able to impose an income tax and a sales tax at the same time.
Yeah.
And so that is why the fair tax is contingent upon repeal of the 16th Amendment. Of course, an act of Congress cannot change the Constitution.
That's right.
That's why the fair tax bill, the fair tax law, when it becomes law, says, all right, if the 16th Amendment is not repealed under the normal constitutional amendment process, then the fair tax will sunset and you get your income tax back. And I would bet you, once the fair tax becomes law, everybody gets the full paycheck, no withholding, no payroll taxes. You keep everything you earn. You no longer have to fill out an income tax return. People are going to like that. And I can guarantee you that the only way to keep that is to get the 16th Amendment repealed. It will be gone in much less than 7 years.
Can you imagine a congressman running for office and saying, when I'm in Congress, I'm going to help get rid of the fair tax and put the income tax back in place? Let's see. Somehow the words tar and feathers come to mind.
Indeed. Now, this is a concern in the question that I have heard before that is addressed here at the FAIRtax FAQ. Since business purchases are not taxable, we have touched on that several times here on FAIRtax Power Radio. How does the fair tax keep individuals from pretending to be a business so they can buy things for personal use tax-free?
And, some people might try that, but they're going to get hammered. For one thing, it's collected by the vendor in every single state, and the vendor sends the collected tax to the state taxing organization. 45 of the 50 states already have a sales tax. They know how to do this. They've been doing this for a while. And if a vendor is playing fast and loose with not sending the tax in or something like that, the state organization comes down to them hard. And if there's a vendor who is pretending to be a business but is not really, well, there's all kinds of hoops that they have to jump through. They have to file quarterly or even monthly taxes depending on the volume of their business. And so if they're not doing this, or if they can't show their sales receipts and things like that, the state is going to get wind of this very quickly.
Yeah, an individual just can't simply identify as a business and claim that I'm a business, therefore I don't have to pay tax on my purchases. Because if you really are a business, you've got to have a business license, an occupational license. You've got to do all this other stuff with your state revenue department, which is going to be collecting the fair tax. It is going to be really hard for people to pretend to be a business or even set up one on paper and say, I am one, because there are so many other requirements that are imposed on businesses that if you don't do this other stuff, they're going to get you.
Yeah, and if you want to talk about fraud and evasion, take a look at the current system. We got 140 million taxpayers. How does the IRS keep up with all 140 million of them? Well, it's obvious that they don't, because right now there's about 693 billion in taxes that are not paid. That's the tax gap. Because it's impossible for the IRS to keep up with 140 million taxpayers. So some of them are underreporting their income and overreporting their expenses. Some of them just aren't reporting at all. Mm-hmm. And the chances of the IRS catching up with all these folks, obviously it's not very good, because there's almost 700 billion in evasion. Well, as opposed to that, since the fair tax will be collected by the vendors, there's about 20 million vendors. Divide that by 50, because there's 50 different states. And so all these vendors are going to be taken care of and scrutinized by their state. So it's going to be a lot easier to catch up with attempted fraud under the fair tax than we have now.
Absolutely. All right. This is one of your favorite hot buttons, I know. So I have picked this question out for you. You ready? How will the FAIRtax plan affect compliance costs?
Oh my goodness, where do we start? And we've talked about this, a lot. But compliance costs for businesses. Now that's what we're talking about. For individuals, compliance costs are not that big a deal. Yeah, you have to spend a day or two, or you have to pay somebody to do your individual income tax. But for businesses, it's a big deal. They have all kinds of accounting that has to be done. Now, just as an example, the tiny little business that my wife and I ran, we had a truck leasing program. We were the only 2 employees because we leased trucks. We did not hire people. We leased trucks out to people. So we were the only 2 employees, and we had to keep, very careful records. Okay, I used QuickBooks, and I did the daily bookkeeping. And then at the end of the year, I made a copy of the file, gave it to my accountant. He went through there and found out any errors that I might have made, so forth, and figured up the K1. There was a form because we were, a 501c. No, not a 501. We were a S corp, and so the taxes that they call that pass through. The taxes were actually paid by us on our individual form. So we'd give the information to the accountant. He'd do all his magic, give us back the K1s and so forth, charge us anywhere from $500 to $1,000, even in years that we didn't have to pay taxes, that we had a loss. He still had to do the bookkeeping, and correct the bookkeeping. So all that stuff has to be paid. Now, that's just one tiny little example.
That was a cost of doing business for your little firm.
Exactly.
What happens to that cost of doing business? It gets passed on to your customers.
Sure, exactly. Yeah, the people that we leased the trucks to, they ended up paying for those costs. And for any company, no matter what their service or product is, the cost of doing business because of the tax code is very high. And for now the larger companies, remember when we did an interview with a local personality who runs several companies, Bob Matthews. He runs one of his companies is the National Parachute Testing Center.
Well, that sounds like lots of fun.
Yeah, it sounds like fun for you, not for me.
I'd like to go to work for him.
Yeah, it's not going to work for me. And he was talking about his pass-through costs and how much simpler it would be if there was only a sales tax. Well, he does have to collect sales tax because Florida has a sales tax. But to do his income tax, to keep up with his income tax, requires a lot of headaches. But he also talked about this firm up in New Jersey that he was familiar with. They had an entire floor, this accounting firm, they had an entire floor of people, and all they did, 8 hours a day, 5 days a week, 52 weeks a year, was read the tax code and make sure that their clients were able to take advantage of all the legal loopholes and deductions in there.
And
that's all they did.
Still got it wrong.
Oh, yeah, sure.
It's just too. And one other point that we need to make is that corporations are legal entities that exist only on paper. People pay taxes
every time.
The business's customers, the business's employees, the business's investors, all of your tax costs, tax liability, your compliance costs as well, passed on to people. Corporations don't pay taxes.
Yeah. So if you're a company that makes things, whether it be windows or whatever, toasters or whatever, and your materials, let's say your raw materials, there's a spike in the cost of those raw materials. Well, now you've got to make a decision. Are you going to add to the cost of your product and maybe lose market share? Are you going to try to get more efficient, which usually means laying people off? All right. A cost of doing business is a cost of doing business, whether it's raw materials or it's the tax code. And if the tax code becomes higher, if the tax rate goes up, or the tax becomes more complicated and you need more help keeping up with it, that's a cost of doing business, just like buying glass or, buying materials for whatever you're making. So the cost of doing business due to the tax code is very, very high for many, many companies. And getting rid of it, getting rid of the income tax, and getting rid of most of those compliance costs will be a huge benefit to them, and they will pass the savings on to the consumer because of competition. They have to stay competitive with their other companies that are offering similar products or service. They have to stay competitive. They have to have, adjust their prices to be competitive with the others.
One more quick question before we got to go here. Can this thing really pass? Can we actually get the fair tax passed into law?
Yeah, actually, if we get all of your help, everybody listening, you need to tell other people about FAIRtax Power Radio, get them to listen. You need to go to FAIRtax.org, the national group, or go to your state organization. On FAIRtax.org, you can navigate around there and find out where in your state or who in your state is running a fair tax organization, and support those folks too. So support the Americans for Fair Taxation at FAIRtax.org or BigSolution.org. Big Solution is another one where you can get active, where you can connect with them, and you can build put in your own information and the information of others to try to get people on board. BigSolution.org is more of an activist type site. Mm-hmm. All right. FAIRtax.org is what we're using right now for the FAQs.
Yeah. For people who don't think that this can pass, it's just too big a chunk. There was a time when people thought that women would never get to vote.
Yeah.
Look at all of the radical changes or the humongous changes that were brought about by the civil rights movement. Probably the most significant grassroots movement in the history of the country.
Yeah.
And they had a significant, and if we get the grassroots behind the fair tax, it won't be easy, but yes, it can pass.
So that is the answer. If we get enough people behind us, yeah, this will pass. Absolutely. And put that together with the fact that we have a Congress that seems to be tripping over their own shoelaces. And, it's not likely they're going to do real tax reform this year. And that's going to leave an opening for us. So they're tripping up, and our grassroots movement, they're going to come together at the right time. So we need to get on this, folks. But it's going to require your help and your neighbors' help and your relatives' help. So spread the word.
All right. Well, we've had fun digging through the FAQ at FAIRtax.org. There are quite a number of other questions, as you can imagine, that we just didn't have time to get into in the short little bit of time that we've got. We do encourage you to go there, www.FAIRtax.org. And you kind of have to open up a little menu right at the top of the page, and then you get this little banner that shows you one of the things you can get is FAQs. And if you go into the FAQ, you'll get a bit more detail on some of the questions that we've touched on, plus a lot more questions answered down there, like is it really fair? Why is it better than our current system? Does it tax used items? What about border issues, stuff like that? There are lots of questions there that you can check out, and we hope you do. www.fairtax.org. Check it out. And also, we got to make sure that folks understand that we will be on Facebook Live again here right shortly.
Yeah, that's right. This episode is posted September 8th, and the next one is just a few days away on Tuesday the 12th, Tuesday, September 12th at 8 p.m. Eastern. The FAIRtax Guys live and in person on Facebook Live. It'll be on the FAIRtax official Facebook page because they have a much bigger presence on Facebook than we do. So,
well, we're working on that.
Join in because it's really a lot of fun.
We get some really good comments, some really good questions, really good feedback.
Yeah.
In fact, again, if you need to go back and listen to the previous episode here of FAIRtax Power Radio based entirely on some of the input, the questions we got from our last Facebook Live event.
Yeah.
And we encourage you to participate again. That will be on Tuesday, September the 12th. 8 p.m. Eastern Time, live and in person.
That's
on
right.
Facebook. And then if you can't come to that particular time, the video still remains on the page, and you can go back and look at it later. We hope you do.
And you can see all the questions and comments, too.
All right. Well, that's going to wrap it up for this edition of FAIRtax Power Radio. That was fun. I'm Bob Paxton.
And I'm Ron Malero.
We are the FAIRtax Guys, reminding you once again that the fair tax is America's big solution for some mighty big problems. And once you understand it,
you'll demand it.
Fair tax is coming. Don't send in the